Okay, I'm going to get started. Hello, everybody. I'm Sebastian Faber. I'm a member of the ALBA Board of Governors, and I teach at Oberlin College here in Ohio. I'm sitting here in hot Ohio in the middle of a heat wave. Um, it's really great to see so many of you here. This is the first of a new series we come up with as part of the Peter Carroll Anti-Fascist Education Fund. Many thanks for the many of you that contributed to that over the past year. We're going to have about one of these a month. Our next one, I'll let you know now, and I'll repeat it again at the end, will be on August 13th, where our friend Peter Carroll himself will be leading the discussion about Casablanca, which, in light of the Popular Front victory in France just recently, has gained kind of a new present/historical dimension. Today, though, we're going to be talking about Guillermo del Toro's El Espinazo del Diablo, The Devil's Backbone. I hope everybody has had a chance to see it. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I hope this will still be interesting to you. If you haven't had a chance to see the whole thing, I hope you'll finish watching it later on. And since this is the first of this series, it's going to be a little bit experimental in how we're going to run it. My plan is basically to run it like a massive classroom. To do with you what I would with my students after they see a film like this one. So I'm going to start with giving a brief kind of contextual introduction, get everybody on the same page, who's who, what happens, where are we, when are we there? And then I'm going to sort of one by one throw some questions out at you, put you in some small groups, have you discuss it with each other, come back, report back to the main group, and sort of see where we end up. Sort of loosely structured to give plenty of space and room for people's ideas to take us in different directions, but enough structure for this not to be pure chaos. Okay, that's kind of the plan. Before we start, just a quick reminder that ALBA is a nonprofit, as you know. We offer this workshop for free, this class, this event for free. But if you feel inclined to donate to us, Dennis Meany, whom I'm thanking here for his work on the background, and Mark Wallum, our executive director, who's also here. Thank you so much for your help with setting this up. Dennis will be posting the donate link regularly throughout here in case you feel generous today and you want to help support our work. Our work is only possible thanks to your generous support. So thank you very much in advance for helping us out. All right, The Devil's Backbone, Guillermo del Toro. As I explained in the introductory video that you may have had a chance to see, Guillermo del Toro is a Mexican director, not a Spanish director, and yet he shot two movies set in Spain during or around the time of the Spanish Civil War. The better known one is the later one, Pan's Labyrinth, El Laberinto del Fauno, which is often shown in high school classrooms, believe it or not, even though it's pretty disturbing and complicated to watch. And a couple of years before that, he made this movie, The Devil's Backbone, which is actually less well known in my experience, even though it was issued in a beautiful print by the Criterion Collection a number of years ago, kind of showing the status this film has among cinephiles, right, among film lovers. In this movie, we basically see a group of boys, children, who are housed in an orphanage in the middle of nowhere, almost literally, right? It's in this massive plain. We know it's a plain because it's really cold at night and really hot during the day. The nearest town is so far away that it takes more than a day walking to get there. And yet, even though they're in the middle of nowhere, they know the war is going on and they feel the effects of the war, the ripple effects of the war, entering this community. And in many ways, this space is a microcosm for the larger war, or you could even say for political relations and political events in the world. The main characters are Carlos, the boy who is really the focus of the movie, whose experiences really anchor the story. The director of the school, Doña Carmen, one of the teachers, an Argentine man called El Doctor Casares, another teacher called Alma, the janitor, doorman type, a younger man called Jacinto, his girlfriend Conchita, and then some other boys. We have Jaime, who becomes a good friend of Carlos. We have El Búho, the owl. We have who doesn't speak, he's mute. We have Galvez, also one of the more little kids. Right, so we have this band of kids. The movie is set, we understand pretty quickly, toward the end of the Spanish Civil War. As you know, the Spanish Civil War starts in 1936 and ends in 1939. But at one point, Doña Carmen says, Catalonia is about to fall. Well, the fall of Catalonia is, I think, February 10th, 1939 or so. So you could say probably we're in January, early February 1939. This was the time, by the way, when massive amounts of Spaniards were already crossing the French border. So those, if you've ever seen images of Spanish refugees, there likely will have been of throngs of men, women, and children, including soldiers, sort of lining up at the Pyrenees at the French-Spanish border, and then being let in and then housed in concentration camps. This happens around that same time. Okay. A couple of other motifs that I think are important to sort of point out. As we all know, the Spanish War was an international affair in addition to a national affair. And those international dimensions come through. First of all, Guillermo del Toro is a Mexican director. There's no Mexican characters in the movie. But the fact that a Mexican director is fascinated with the Spanish War is not a coincidence, because Mexico is one of the two countries that supported the Republic militarily during the war. President Lázaro Cárdenas, who governed Mexico from 1934 to 1940, sent arms and was internationally supportive of the Spanish Republic when most other democracies were not, along with the Soviet Union. And that's one thing. The other thing is we have an Argentine character, El Doctor Casares, who has been, according to the story, has been in Spain for quite a while, for a number of years. And that is important because what you could call Republican Spain, progressive Republican Spain, what we would think of as liberal Spain, which really comes into its own in 1931 with the proclamation of the Spanish Republic, had really important Latin American networks, support networks. So there was, even though Latin American republics had become independent more than 100 years earlier, there were lots of intellectual connections and travels back and forth in the 1910s, in the 1920s, in the 1930s. And it's no coincidence that when the Spanish War breaks out, important Latin American writers, intellectuals, journalists are already in Spain or come to Spain and play an important role. So Octavio Paz is there, the Mexican poet. Pablo Neruda is there, the Chilean communist poet. There's Nicolás Guillén, the Cuban poet. There's all kinds of Latin American connections, and the figure of El Doctor Casares with his full-on Argentine accent really kind of references that. That's kind of the context of the story. Now, to me, what's the most interesting, one of the most interesting parts of this film is that it's a Gothic kind of ghost story, right? And it really opens in in a very challenging kind of way with this dramatic scene of a bomb dropping, and then a monologue by the voice that later we'll recognize as El Doctor Casares, but we don't know at that moment it's El Doctor Casares, who gives a kind of a philosophical reflection on the topic of what is a ghost. So what I want to start, the first thing I want to do is play that opening scene, that opening clip for you, and then put you in groups and really for you to reflect a little bit on this prologue, which is also the epilogue, and which takes on a new kind of meaning, perhaps, when it's repeated at the end that you don't know yet at the beginning. So what I'm going to have you do once I put you in groups is to reflect a little bit on how the meaning of that prologue / epilogue changes once you've seen the movie, and what do we do with the statements that Dr. Casares makes in this prologue. So I'm going to try to share my screen here for a second and play that clip for you. So you all should be able to see this clip here. I'm going to play it for you, and you should hear it with sound and all.
¿Qué es un fantasma? Un evento terrible condenado a repetirse una y otra vez. Un instante de dolor, quizá. Algo muerto que parece por momentos vivo aún. Un sentimiento suspendido en el tiempo. Como una fotografía borrosa. Como un insecto atrapado en ámbar.
All right. So this was the opening scene, in which I'll repeat the monologue there for a second so everybody can remember what he says. So it's ¿Qué es un fantasma? What is a ghost? A terrible event condemned to repeat itself over and over again. An instant of pain, perhaps, something dead that for a moment or for some moments seemed still to be alive. A feeling or sentiment suspended in time, like a blurry photograph, like an insect trapped in amber. All right, so I'm going to try to create groups here. Let's see, there's about 64 of us currently. So I'm going to make about 6 groups, I think. So 10 or a little bit more than 10 people per group. And what I want you to do is in your group, take, let's say, let's give you 8 minutes to begin with, because I imagine for everybody to speak a little bit, it's nice, 7 to 8 minutes. And I want you to basically ask each other or to reflect on what do you do with this kind of poetic, reflective, philosophical introduction that is also an epilogue. How does the meaning change after you see the whole film? And to what extent does it allow us to enter the film, to start thinking about it in a different way? So what does it add to the film, this book-ended reflection, right? One other thing I'd love for you to do is to talk about who in your group is going to be the person to share out what kind of the ideas that have come out of your discussion, right? To do that in advance will save us some time later on. So think about it, talk about it. How does this particular philosophical viewpoint allow us to think about what happens in the film? And who's going to report out on all your reflections? All right, I'm going to open the groups. Feel free to just join the group, and I'll reconvene by mic in about 7 minutes or so. So about 24 minutes past 5 on my clock. All right, here we go.
You have to unmute too, as well, Sebastian.
We have a couple of people stuck in a room, I think, but well.
They should automatically close.
Yeah. Being stuck in a breakout room when everybody's back is a little bit like being a ghost being stuck in this earthy realm when you should be elsewhere. All right. Group 1, which had Bruce, Deborah, Elisa, Jonathan, and some people in it. Peter, does anybody want to just quickly share a couple of ideas that came out of there?
There. I'm going to go ahead and allow. You should be able to, you should be able to unmute yourself.
That Paige, was Paige in group 1?
Yes, Paige,
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Paige Delano. I'm the respondent, and
sure.
About half of us talked, and
Okay.
So we thought that the beginning, somebody said we start thinking of ghosts as individuals, that there's a lot to resolve after the person has died, but it also connects to broader events that are destined to be repeated. And someone suggested the blurred images and the photo were also really important. The ghost is like what seems like to be kind of the inversion of a fairy tale. And war haunts us still. We talked about the bomb as both allusion to much larger bombing in Spain and the sort of initial German bombing practices in Spain, but also Vietnam War, which that image of a bomb dropping from a B-52 is kind of echoed in there. We talked about mass graves being still very topical, even now. That there's still the importance of memory now that the memory law has been revoked or opened up, that people can actually talk about memory in Spain.
Right.
And then we talked about the water and the amber color. I was sort of concerned about, I thought amber was really important. And so people had really interesting comments about the water being amber. The fetuses were in water that was amber colored. And how, a millennium of people could be trapped in amber like this. So it was an interesting, but too short a discussion.
All right. But really, so we see it, I mean, really important things I think one, you said it's like a ghost is something that repeats, the history that repeats itself, right? That's stuck in repetition mode. You made immediate the connections between the past portrayed in the film and future events being Vietnam War all the way to the present, right? In Spain and elsewhere. And I think what your group left kind of up in the air, I think, was whether ghosts are good or bad, a good thing or a bad thing, right? So
we didn't talk about that. We didn't get to that.
Right. Yeah, because that's because they remind us of what needs to be resolved, but they're also what is unresolved in a way. Right? So you get the double thing. And I think in the film, I would say that ghosts are scary as hell, but they're also helpful and good in a way. So, okay. Group 2 had Bela, Eliza, Karen, Jerry, Philip. Anybody from that group wants to jump in and add to this?
Should just be able to unmute yourselves and talk, whoever that individual may be.
With Susan, right?
Susan Red. Oh, you're can you
You're muted.
Can you unmute Susan, Dennis?
Sure.
There.
Oop.
You unmuted
right.
me finally.
Go ahead.
Because I hadn't seen the film, I volunteered to be the reporter. An interesting reaction from Philip was that the poetry at the very beginning seemed very abstract and was difficult to relate to. That the sequence at the beginning was also confusing. Was it intentional? Was the question. And the kid was not killed by the bomb. So there was a disconnect with the image and what happened. Stephen said that there was a basic metaphor in the beginning for Republican Spain. There was already a ghost showing. The bomb was not only over a specific location, but a city, and then symbolically over all of Spain as a threat. The film doesn't tell us that it is what year it's in, and why would the question came up, why would an isolated orphanage be the target in the middle of nowhere? Eliza had an interesting insight. It's the same as in Gaza. Why waste a bomb? And so that's what we talked about a bit, wasting a bomb. Did the orphanage actually fund the Republicans? Brenda saw the bomb as the threat that you are anywhere in Spain under the threat of the violence. And there's Philip was saying there's so much we don't know at the beginning. We don't know the location of the bomb. We don't know the size of the bomb. And Bella mentioned that children were representative of a living thing with violence going on, the threat towards children in a war.
Good, great. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, it connects really well with what we heard from group one. The couple of things that I would highlight from what you said was the confusing nature of the opening. You have no idea what's going on. You get combined with this, and only at the end do things kind of fall into place, if you remember. Whether that's deliberate, I would say everything in the movie is deliberate. I think it's very well thought through, and I think we tend to sort of land on the conclusion that the director wants to confuse us the same way that the kids feel confused in the beginning. They don't know what's going on. They don't understand the war. They have little to no clue. All they can use is their imagination and their understanding of the world, limited as it is, and we're kind of placed in that position. The idea of the bomb as a metaphor, I think that's really important. I think the entire movie constantly mobilizes objects, characters, and situations for us to extrapolate, right? To make them either see them as symbols or see them as like a synecdoche, like a small representation of a part for the whole. I think that's definitely true. Bombing was so important in the Spanish War. The idea that the bomb is sitting there in the middle the whole time, unexploded, supposedly deactivated, but who knows, right? Is also in itself a little bit of a ghost, right? Like a little bit like today when you go to I'm from Holland. We still have once in a while a bomb from World War II will be dug up somewhere, right? And it has to be deactivated. The Baltic Sea is full of landmines from World War II that ships once in a while still run into. So there's all kinds of ways in which wars leave legacies like that, right? Not to mention Vietnam or Gaza for that matter now, right? So that's another super interesting idea that you brought up. Group three, Alan, Jim, Miguel, Richard, who is your spokesperson?
Anybody?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's Tony Geist and Charlie Oberndorf, my friend and guest.
Hey, Charlie. Hey, Tony.
Hey, how you doing? We started off with Nicole, who points out that in epics and in oral tradition, they very often begin in the middle of the action and then go backward. And then perhaps conclude with a sense of how we don't want to be involved in this violence again. But things aren't remembered in linear fashion. So there's the question of how we tell the story. How do you deal with history? Some of it erased. If you lived in Spain after the Spanish Civil War, most of your experiences were erased unless you hung out with close friends and talked with them without worrying about people informing on you.
Erased or silenced, yeah.
Yeah. Ruby said that in a way we are like bugs in amber. And she was captured by the phrase that an emotion suspended in time. And Nicole brought up the idea that the child narrators, their emotions are suspended in time. And Alan pointed out that for children, trauma gets stuck with us through adulthood. And so whatever happens with them stays there. Tony brought up the idea that we've talked about before that, begins with a ghost and ends with a ghost. But again, our knowledge is fractured. We see Jaime looking like the murderer of Santi at the very beginning. And we see Santi appearing to be a ghost who haunts with malicious intent. And it just occurs to me now, part of fascism, and we see this now today with all the talk of libtards and stuff, is that fascism tries to make the victim look like the perpetrator.
Good, great. Thank you. It's really concise and really, really rich. What you say about narrative structure, I think is really important, right? The movie purposely confuses us. It starts in the middle of the action in a way. We have to kind of puzzle things together. And when you think about historical memory, the way that communities remember their collective past, it's kind of easy to think of that as a static or cumulative process. But in practice, of course, all of us when we're born and grow up, begin to learn about the past of our community, and we construct that narrative as we grow older and we understand more of it. Like, so when did you all first learn about, I don't know, the Spanish Civil War? When did you learn about World War II? Through movies and books, and what do you learn at school, and the stories you heard here from your family. So all of us as individuals and as communities build that sort of, are born in the middle of the action in a way, and have to sort of make sense of it as we go along. And that narrative shifts as we grow older. I think that's really important. And the movie illustrates that, I think. The other thing you pointed out, Charlie, I think is important, that what is it, the effect that we see this through children's eyes, right? It's not the first movie to do this. It's not the first movie to do it with regard to the Spanish Civil War and its aftermath, but it's a really powerful tool to sometimes universalize an experience, sometimes to symbolize it, sometimes to depoliticize it. And there's plenty of movies that are being paid homage, paid tribute in this Guillermo del Toro movie. One in particular I want to point out, and if you haven't seen it, I want to urge you to see it, The Spirit of the Beehive. Victor Erice, who is a well-known Spanish filmmaker, has only made a handful of films. In 1973, I want to say, made El Espíritu de la Colmena, The Spirit of the Beehive, also issued in Criterion, just like this one. And it's with two young girls who are at the center of the action. And there's a couple of scenes that are really reminiscent, and even the way the characters are, the older man, the older woman, and then the kids, it's very similar. But the idea that this is a kid's perspective is one other distancing tactic that Guillermo del Toro applies to pull us away from the historical facts and think in much larger terms, as you guys are all doing currently, which is great.
I'm sorry, is Owl, who doesn't talk and only watches, a mirror of the girl in Spirit of the Beehive, who watches but doesn't speak either?
Oh, that's a good, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Absolutely. Yeah. The things that to me resonated with the role of the photographs and the way that the pre-story past, meaning the years of the Spanish Republic, which have been destroyed by the war and will remain destroyed until today, feel incredibly distant in the characters' lives, but still completely just shaped them in who they are, right? So in this case, Jacinto's parents, Carmen's dead husband, what the Spanish Republic was like, and everybody knows will never come back, basically.
I have a quick question about this is something that it just occurred to me after we got out of the group. The image of the amber colored water, and that's contaminated water, and that immediately speaks to me of uranium, and when we think of, not so much, when we think, as you know, I've been looking a little bit about the history of solar energy development in Spain, especially during the end of the Civil War, and the hope for how it connected to anti-nuclear policy. Is that just me reading something into it, or can you speak about that a little bit? Is that something
it sounds a bit far-fetched, maybe, but who knows? I think, and the idea of insects and amber is like, it's such a universal image, right? Like, I think that the ochre is so pretty, like the dry landscape is ochre that comes back there, and the idea of the Hollywood convention, like the sepia filter to indicate the past, I think that's in there, but who knows? I think in a way, the movie invites us so much to extrapolate, to read into it, that maybe nothing is really off limits in that way. I want to be sure that all the groups have a chance to report back. So I think we're in group 4 with Gail, James, Julieta, Molly, Peter, Susanna. Susanna, are you the designated? I saw your hand up.
No, I am not.
Okay.
It's me.
Okay, Julieta, go ahead.
Kicking and screaming. So we discussed a variety of things. We were maybe not the best students necessarily, all of us. Probably me most of all, or least of all. But we talked about how it had a dreamlike quality. We were a little general and about how this relates to the context we find ourselves in today. Mainly because I started us off that way because that's my main interest right now. I'm the granddaughter of a Spanish Civil War veteran, whatever. And my cousin made a film called, you might know it, La Memoria es Vaga. So anyway, we talked about how it was dreamlike and dark, as his movies usually are. Oops, something just popped up in front of you. We talked, Susanna kind of took us through her interpretation, which I certainly agreed with, where the opening, his opening narrative was very, we interpreted it in very literal ways because we had no real context yet. And then in the end, it was really an allegory for everything that happened then and since in many ways in Spain, right? And the ghosts of the past, how they continue to haunt history and our world today. Can't remember who was talking about how it was more, they sort of interpreted it as more emotional and less maybe historical or political. And then some of us sort of, about cruelty, how it was about cruelty. But then we pointed out that that's sort of what fascism is about, and about cruelty and greed, those very base things that may seem apolitical, but they can certainly lead to political outcomes. In terms of sort of metaphor, I just have a couple in terms something I didn't get to add to that I'd like to add, those blurry photos. I think it's sort of a flip side of what you're saying, or like a different nuance, which is it's like how La Memoria es Vaga, how there's this lost memory, this lost reality, so that this current, not so much, a little less today, I think, but in the early 2000s, Spain's life was built upon a false structure in a way, a lack of information. So that's that blurry photograph, right? It's the memory is blurry. The understandings and interpretations of the horrors are blurred. So it's not concrete. And I think also that the amber, the insect preserved in amber, the Santi, who was killed, was sort of a young child, and the ghost is sort of like an insect preserved in amber. This young child struck down and stuck, right? That's what a ghost is too. So there are these metaphors that complement each other, I think. Anyway.
That's really great, Julia. It sounds like your group had an amazing discussion. A couple of things that I would point out. You talked about allegory. I think to read the movie as an allegory is it seems to invite us to do that in different ways. Whereas, like, you could say the character of Carmen is the Spanish Republic. The one contextual thing I forgot to mention, but I think it's in the Criterion clip with me in it, is that the gold of the Spanish Republic maintain control over the gold reserves and ship those to the Soviet Union, partially as payment for weapons and things like that. But the gold is there, right? So to see Carmen as the embodiment of the Spanish Republic, maimed and imperfect and all that, but still representing a set of values, I think is important. It was also, of course, not uncommon to represent the Republic as a female figure, both in Spain and in France, right? So that's not a wild allegorical inference.
But the sexuality is really interesting, but I don't think we'll have time to talk about that.
No, it is super interesting. And so you talked about cruelty and greed, like fascism is driven by cruelty and greed. I think one of the interesting points the movie makes, I think, is that Jacinto, being the sort of the fascist in the film, right, is really a poor kid. I mean, he's so flawed and so insecure. His masculinity is so fragile. He feels compelled to kill his own girlfriend in front of his friends, not to lose face, right? So that sense of fragile masculinity driving him to be so incredibly cruel and aggressive, as opposed to kind of the acceptance that somebody like Dr. Casares has of his very imperfect masculinity. I think Paige, you have a really good point. That's so key to the movie, that whole narrative. And the blurry photograph, I think that's a really good point, that by 2000, by around the turn of the millennium in Spain, the past was like a vague memory, right? And things have come into focus in the past 25 years in a way. I think that's a really good point. Let's move to group 5. Karen, Maria Cristina, Mark, Marshall, Peggy, who is in your group to report?
We didn't have one single person.
Okay.
So I'll just say a few things and then others can jump in and complete our train of thought.
Sure thing.
It's, you know,
That's good. Go ahead.
everywhere. But anyway, I was focusing on ghost simply because the word ghost usually means scary and so on, but immediately you see it through the eyes of Carlos. And for Carlos, yes, it's scary, but it becomes then someone you want to know more of, and it continues. Then I mean, the ghost is his guide to what is really happening there. There was a whole discussion on the colors, which are extremely important. So please jump in, anyone.
Okay, the colors that now Marshall, you were in our group, right, Marshall? You said that the colors were blue, orange, and black, and that somehow they symbolized a different aspect of the story, although I wasn't sure what they were. But as well, we talked about the beginning and the end, and how different it was. The same text, but it meant something completely different from the beginning and to the end. I think the one who brought up somebody else said this already, so I feel a little silly repeating it, but that history repeats itself, but also that we as the audience knew that these characters were dead. By the time we were watching the film, they were dead. These boys heading off into the unknown, heroically, but we knew that certainly by the time we were watching the film that they would be dead. So they were the ghosts telling us, don't forget us. Don't forget. It's crucial to remember.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you, Peggy.
Sure.
Yeah, that's I think repetition and variation, right? It's the same words, but they mean something different because an hour and a half, or almost 2 hours have passed. And absolutely, the movie itself is kind of a vehicle for the ghosts to reach us, and to think and to not forget, and to as many of you are doing, to make them alive in our present again. Absolutely. I think Maria Cristina said Carlos loses his fear of the ghost. Carlos loses fear of that, and overcoming of fear is, of course, a motif that comes time and time. Like Conchita loses her fear of Jacinto. The kids lose their fear of Jacinto. But the fact that Carlos learns to see the ghost as a guide, as opposed to something scary and to run away from, I think is really important, right? In terms of the ghosts have to be dealt with, they have to be accepted, and their demands have to be fulfilled in a way, right? Like he asks Santi, what do you want? I want you to bring me Jacinto. He says, okay, you got it. We'll do that. Okay, group 6, last group. Beatrice, Bina, Bruce, Kathy, Elisa, Jeff, Lisa. Anybody wants to say something there from group 6?
We didn't really choose anyone. I'm Kathy.
Right. Go ahead, Kathy.
I have a couple of things that I wrote down. Someone said, I thought in terms of it being a ghost story, we thought in one sense, the ghost is how we inflict horror on each other. So that's, seeing the ghost as a bad thing. And the other thing someone said, I thought this was very interesting. Can't remember who it was. The most responsible people in the movie are the children. and they're kind of opposite of Lord of the Flies. I mean, I actually thought, when I said, what is this, a Lord of the Flies thing? So anyway, I thought that was interesting. But I don't know, Bruce, did you want to say anything else, or Bhutani? Or anyone?
You're muted. Somebody.
Should be able to unmute yourselves if you'd like to talk.
Yeah, sorry, we were muted. Technological, not
Difficulties.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, I was kind of, that we've all talked about the color, and coincidentally, in a very weird way, just this morning, I was listening to Tom Holland, who's a historian, on his podcast, talking about fascism in Spain. And they discussed fascism, Spain actually not being really fascist, but Salazar and Franco actually being reactionaries. And essentially what they did, unlike Hitler and Mussolini, who wanted to kind of go into the future kind of thing, they actually wanted to preserve their countries in amber, essentially, right? They basically froze the place. And so from the time of Franco until the revolution, until he died and democracy took over again, you had, this place in amber, right? And as a result of the place being in amber, you also had the blurry photographs. The blurry photographs are when your place is frozen in amber and you're not allowed to talk about it and you're not allowed to discuss it ever, your memories are actually blurry. Your memories are, fixed in time. They kind of get distorted by the time you actually begin to remember them. And so that's where I felt the amber was very important. And then the other thing was, you talked about last night we watched it before the film. You talked about the influence of Hitchcock. This is just incidental. And I'm wondering if almost the beginning scene where you see the bomb and then you see the young kid over the other kid, it's almost like a Hitchcockian MacGuffin, it's this misleading thing, right? So you're thinking that all through the movie, and actually it's not relevant to the guy's kid's death. And it's kind of like very Hitchcockian, right? The whole, again, the framing is very Hitchcockian. So
yeah, that's a really good point. Absolutely. I think that like throwing us off, I think it's definitely that. And what you said about the preserving the country in amber, like wanting modernity to stop, basically wanting to sort of fend off modernity and stick to traditional ways of life and government. I think absolutely that was definitely applicable to Francoism. It's a really interesting point. Susanna, you have your hand up.
You're muted.
Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't pick up on this during the movie, but through this discussion, I do think that the imagery of the amber is quite powerful in a couple of different ways. Because first off, I do remember from the introduction, just as it is mentioned about in the monologue about the insect trapped in amber. That's when we see the image of Sandy inside of the water. And I think that it was Nicole who brought up the issue about the fetuses that are also stuck in liquid that is amber color. And if you think what a fetus would represent, that something is not quite developed, is paralyzed in a stage of development. These fetuses were not born. And so, and that can also be sort of like an allegory for the Spanish Republic, because if we also think about it, the Spanish Republic was just 8 years old when he died. She was the age of the children, more or less, in the movie, of the orphans. And I don't know how well known this is outside of Spain, but in Spain, the Republic, even today, the Second Republic is known as La Niña, which is the little girl or the young girl. So anyway, that's something interesting to think about, perhaps.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, the Spanish Republic as the born with a defect or should have or underdeveloped or killed while still a baby. Absolutely, Bruce, you're muted, I think.
It's first you're muted.
Sorry. It just occurs to me that the most obvious thing is that the orphans are the Republic. There was nobody coming to their aid other than the individuals of the International Brigade.
Yeah.
So that to me is an interesting central thing. And also I was, as Kathy said, the one that said that those children were the antithesis of the children in Lords of the Fly.
What?
The children in the film act opposite of the kids in the book and the film Lord of the Fly.
Yeah.
They take control, they are organized, and I think it's very critical that they looked up to and trusted what Dr. Casares had to say. So there's that intergenerational bridge that he represents there. And also the thing that was mentioned about Jacinto and the thinness of his masculinity. I think that is a major feature of fascist leaders. Certainly, to me, it's always gotten me that no one has ever noticed the way that Trump gestures. His gestures were, as I recall, in the 70s, what would be called swishy. Those are his hand and body movements. He's not alone. There are several members of the Senate that are exactly like that. And the compensation obviously is you thrust at somebody else who is in a weaker position of you to do terrible damage or to kill, because somehow that makes up for that image. So
Yeah.
I would
That's a good point, Bruce. I think since you made the connection with Trump, one thing that jumped out at me reviewing the movie this time is that the end where Jacinto finds the gold, sees himself reflected in the gold, makes him a Narcissus. And then, like Narcissus, he ends up falling into the pond and drowning because of the weight of the gold. So that his greed and narcissism does him in as does his fragile masculinity. Ruby, you had your hand up.
Ruby, you need to unmute yourself. Oops. You might need to unmute yourself again. I think if anybody has a question, we've kind of entered the final 15 minutes. If you have a question, you can use the raise
Okay,
function.
do
We'll
we
try
have
to get
enough
to you.
time for comments at this
Yes.
point? Okay, a couple of things briefly. That I'm not sure that there's any kind of trauma except for political trauma. I think even a physical trauma that leaves one disabled, how one winds up having to deal with it as a political issue of disability, oppression, et cetera, et cetera. So I think all trauma, you could make a case that, oh my God, somebody, whatever. But in the end, why isn't somebody with a physical trauma helped? And that essentially, all of this is what I call capitalism and its ugly babies, like racism and sexism, et cetera, et cetera. And that one of the things that we mentioned in our group is that I thought, and somebody else mentioned it, that children are actually better equipped to deal with trauma than adults because they deal with it straight out. They process it, they scream, they yell, they beat up their parent or whatever it is. Whereas adults have learned this kind of pseudo rationality, like Jacinto, who has covered everything over. So it's a cover up in a way. And if you don't process your trauma, you will never get rid of it. And people who put out their trauma on somebody else, it's an attempt to get it off themselves, but it doesn't work. So he's stuck with that. And those are ghosts too. They're with you forever.
Yeah.
If you don't let them out.
Yeah.
And one more point related is the issue of the masculinity, super masculinity and it's so much that is so much a part of fascism. It was part of Germany. It was, and part of that fascism. I lived in Israel, Palestine for 6 years. I can tell you the issue of toxic masculinity pervades the country.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons for the going after Gaza. It was humiliating.
Great.
They quote got caught with their pants down, if you can think about it that way.
Thank you, Ruby. That's great. Before we go to, I think Paige and Kathy have their hands up. I want to quickly share, since you guys mentioned this, I want to share a couple of images. This will take me just a couple seconds. This is an iconic image of Spanish Civil War exile. One of the first images that pops up when you Google's how Spanish Civil War exile. This is one of those images of people crossing the Pyrenees. To me, the final scene of the movie referenced this literally literally very clearly, right, with the kid walking with the thing, as well as, of course, the fact that the kid here in front has only one leg, just like Doña Carmen. And since we're talking images, children's drawings are an important legacy of the Spanish War iconography, because American Quakers, among other people, applied art therapy with children in refugee camps. And the kids' drawings of the war have become part of the visual legacy of the war. And it's no coincidence that childlike drawings are so prominent in the movie. This is a famous collage made with a picture by Shim Seymour, the Polish photographer, which together with the planes clearly come back in the movie. These images of bombs from posters I mentioned earlier. And to me, that these images of children that were bombed, school children were bombed outside Madrid, really are, at least if they didn't inspire Guillermo del Toro, they inspired whoever he hired to design the Ghost of Santi, right? This sort of porcelain doll-like effect of the children. These were photographs of the children were the ones that prompted Virginia Woolf in Three Guineas to write about the Spanish War and violence. And Susan Sontag talks about that in The Pain of Others. So these are some images that I wanted to share. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now, and let's do the last 7 minutes, just comments from everybody. I'm going to stop share. Here we go. Let's see, Paige, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to go back. First of all, the great OSS spy Virginia Hall also had one leg, and I think maybe there was another French woman that only had one leg. So that's an interesting. And I know, Sebastian, you've talked about in your discussion, you talked about the maimed body and the whole body, and
yeah, right.
I wanted to just. I think the emphasis on sexuality and the fascist male sexuality, but why does she, whose name I don't know,
Carmen,
why does she have sex? And I think I think that women have often been vilified and attacked for being sexual people in wartime. And we know that the anarchists were really good about women, supporting women's sexuality. But this film seems to be really kind of have a masculinist approach, or the women are just victims of. So anyway, that was my question, my comment.
Yeah, no, I think you put your finger on it. One of the more complicated things to explain, like what's the relationship between Carmen and Jacinto, right? Which seems almost pedophilic at some point, because she started sleeping with him when he was 17 and a student of hers, basically. And she says she's ashamed of it, right? She wants to hide it. So there's something really complicated going on. But to me, I think triangular relationships are really important throughout the movie. So you have Carmen, Jacinto, and Dr. Casares. You have Jaime, Conchita, and Jacinto, right? All these triangles all the time that make people choose constantly between loyalty and betrayal, that really drive the dramatic action in a way. And I think for me, Carmen's imperfection, like Dr. Casares' imperfections, help fill out the character and make them all the more admirable for what they end up doing in a way, I guess. I don't know, that's my read on it. Kathy.
Yeah, hi. I just had one thought. Anyway, I've loved all the comments. Jacinto is like representing the fascist male, strong. And I think it's interesting that how the children, after the fire, I think, plot and they make those sticks, they got, they work at creating the weapons and how they kill him. So it's sort of like the children are killing fascism, let's say.
Yeah.
All I wanted to
Oh,
say.
right. Yeah, and the echoes there, like, are the farmers, right, with their sticks, or the guerrilla, right, fighting the powerful. But the scene itself is, to me, of them killing Jacinto or wounding him. One is vampire, right, the stake through the heart, the wooden stake through the heart, and the other one is bullfighting. I mean, Jacinto becomes the bull, right? And already earlier on, there's the pictures of somebody's back being bloodied, which reminds one of the bullfight. But the final scene specifically, with the stake through the axilla, right, through the armpit. Tony, go ahead.
Really quick, if anyone subscribes to the Criterion channel, you can watch Spirit of the Beehive for free. Second, if you watched the Criterion interview with Sebastian, there's this powerful image at night with the bomb in the middle between the two bullies, between Jaime and Jacinto. And that alignment makes me think about what transforms Jaime, how they're both bullies, but one grows to be an oppressor and the other grows to be a humane collaborator. And I think it's interesting how the kids both stand up to him and work with him to bring him on their side, and he becomes their ally.
And their leader, yeah.
Yeah, they help him deal with the trauma of bearing witness, where Jacinto never had that.
Right.
And so we have the Republic not being perfect. She used him. The Republic doesn't have a golden history. It's a complex one.
Yeah.
And her failures, I think, represent the failures of the Republic.
That's an interesting point, because when you say the Republic, what I hear you say is the Republican leadership, i.e. the intelligentsia, the professors and the politicians that occupied parliament. And I think what I hear you saying is that the children are the people in a way then, or is that not where you're going?
I wasn't, but I like that idea.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll credit you with it anyway. Julietta, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that. That was sort of what I was going to say, but in terms of, I think the movie, like life and politics and history, is very much about making choices every minute of every day and seeing what the choices are. So Jaime, the children brought him over as I'm sorry, I forget your name. Just Charlie, is it? Just said it comes back to, for me, politics and history always comes back to essential values and human emotion and human needs, and the child in all of us, not to sound too woo-woo, but the child in all of us remains throughout our lives, right? We're these adults, but inside we're still dealing with our being children and figuring it all out. And every moment of every day, the characters had choices to make under great duress, as we all do, and enough kindness in the right moments, enough forbearance when Carlitos didn't tell on him ever, even after he was, slashed in the face. And that somehow eventually, and his own courage brought this tough guy, this potential brute like Jacinto, over to being a moral being, making moral decisions and doing right, making,
You mean Jaime?
Jaime, yes,
Right.
sorry. So I'm building on and agreeing with Charlie, but I feel like the movie was like that all the time, in every moment, both in its allegorical, metaphoric, symbolic characters and symbolism, as so the Republic, wherever we are, we have to choose between being I'm sorry, Dr. Casales, was it? I forget. between
Casares, right, yeah.
Casares, being him or being the Jacinto, going with physical, brute impulse based on our emotions, or going with love and reason and analysis.
Right.
So that's the one way in which we are choosing right from the beginning. And then throughout the film, making choices every moment. Even that bomb that sits there the whole time is this symbol of something about to explode, possibly about to explode. Is it gonna be violent? Is it gonna remain inert and just a presence? And this is what we live with every day and what we have to make choices about every day.
Yeah,
So
that's a really
all.
good. Thank you, Julia. That's a really nice way to end this. I think. I think I want to connect what you said to Ruby's point about trauma. Since in the end we have two ghosts, right? We have the Santi's ghost, which is throughout, and then toward the end we have the speaking ghost, which is El Dr. Casares, who we know even after death helps out the kids to escape and all that. And it seems to me that one of the things the movie tries to make us think about is whether trauma is trauma being the ghosts, something to overcome, to scare away, to exercise, or to give a place, right? Like the kids give the bomb a place and integrate it into their lives. And Spain has to give its past a place and integrate it into its present, not paper over it, but tell stories about it and make meaning out of it and be inspired by it. And I think what people said about this is really the anti-Lord of the Flies, because these kids are solidary with each other, right? They engage in collective action driven by by progressive political values in a way, and as opposed to Jacinto, who wants to run it all by himself. Julia.
I think it's the reverse of Lord of the Flies. In Lord of the Flies, they start out wanting law and structure and solidarity, and they wind up really splitting into savage camps. And I think here it's almost the reverse. They start out as semi-savage with bullying and everyone following the bully, and then instead they band together and let connectedness and humanity win the bully over and change things around.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. We're out of time. This is really great to do this with you all. I'm looking forward to August 13th. We're going to do Casablanca with Peter Carroll. Great opportunity to watch that great movie one more time. And thank you so much for your wonderful contributions to the discussion. Don't forget to donate to ALBA if you feel so inclined. The donate link is in the chat, but you can always just find it online as well. Lovely to speak to you all, to see you all, and we'll see you next time in a month or so. Bye, everybody. Thank you.